While I was battling pneumonia at home, Alex casually signed the insurance papers I'd left on the kitchen counter without reading them. 3 days later, he was screaming in Tobias Bennett's office when he realized they were divorce papers, and that my lawyer was the ex-boyfriend he'd always been jealous of, now one of the most feared attorneys in the state. The fluorescent lights of my bedroom felt harsh against my fever-flushed skin. The pneumonia had taken residence in my lungs for over a week, making each breath a conscious effort. The doctor had prescribed bed rest, antibiotics, and patience. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But patience had long abandoned me in this marriage. I watched through half-lidded eyes as Alex moved around our bedroom, his attention focused entirely on his reflection in the mirror as he adjusted his tie. Not once did he glance toward the bed where I lay shivering despite the extra blankets. Not once did he ask if I needed water, medication, or simply a comforting touch. "I've got that conference in Chicago this weekend," he announced to his reflection, rather than to me. "I'll be back Tuesday or Wednesday, depends on how the networking goes." His tone suggested networking wasn't the only thing he had planned. I nodded weakly, though he wasn't looking to see my response. This was our routine now. Him speaking, me acknowledging, neither of us truly connecting. The space between us in our king-sized bed had become a canyon over the years, too wide to bridge with small talk and obligatory kisses goodbye. "There are some insurance papers on the kitchen counter," I said, my voice raspy from coughing. "Can you sign them before you go? It's the healthcare proxy I told you about." He checked his watch, impatience flashing across his features. "Fine. Where do I sign?" "I've marked the spots with sticky tabs. Yellow ones." He nodded, already mentally. "Gone from our conversation, from our bedroom, from our marriage. I'll do it now. Don't want to miss my flight." As he left the room without another word, without so much as a glance back at me, something hardened in my chest that had nothing to do with the infection in my lungs. This coldness, this indifference, it had been building for years. The forgotten anniversaries, the late nights at the office, the mysterious weekend trips that always seemed to coincide with times I needed him most. I heard his expensive leather shoes clicking against our hardwood floors, then the sound of papers rustling. In the kitchen, the scratching of his pen. The finality of what he was actually signing sent a small, unexpected thrill through me. "Done," he called out, his voice already distant as the front door opened. "Call Donna if you need anything." The door closed with a decisive click, and silence enveloped our home. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. He hadn't even read what he was signing. Hadn't noticed that beneath the innocuous top sheet about healthcare proxies lay divorce papers meticulously prepared by Tobias Bennett, the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state. And coincidentally, the man I'd dated before meeting Alex, fact my husband had never fully made peace with. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed out a message. "It's done." He signed without reading a single page. Tobias's response came almost immediately. "Not surprised. I'll file first thing Monday. How are you feeling?" I stared at the screen, considering the multiple layers of that question. The pneumonia had left me physically weakened, but something else was stirring inside me. Something that felt remarkably like strength. "Better than I have in years," I replied. And it was true. As I lay there in my sickness, I felt more alive than I had in all. The years of my slowly dying marriage, Alex had no idea that while he was flying to Chicago, likely to meet the woman whose perfume occasionally clung to his shirts, he was already legally separated from me. He had no idea that I had discovered the offshore account where he'd been, hiding money for years. He had no idea that every late-night call, every suspicious credit card charge, every manipulative lie had been meticulously documented and was now in the hands of the man he'd always been threatened by. For 3 years, I had been the perfect wife, patient, understanding, always willing to look the other way. I had built my life around his needs, his career, his desires. I had dimmed my own light to let his shine brighter. And through it all, I had watched as he systematically dismantled every dream I had ever shared with him. But no more. The pneumonia. That had initially felt like a curse had become my unexpected ally, giving me the time and cover I needed to finalize my escape plan. While Alex thought I was too weak and sick to function, I had been methodically reclaiming my power. One signature, line at a time. I pulled the covers up to my chin, allowing myself a small smile despite the ache in my chest. In 3 days, Alex would return from Chicago, probably bearing a generic gift to ease his conscience. He would stroll through our front door expecting everything to be exactly as he had left it. Me, waiting patiently in our bed, grateful for whatever scraps of attention he decided to throw my way. Instead, he would receive a call from Tobias Bennett's office, requesting his immediate presence to discuss the divorce proceedings he had already initiated with his own signature. He would sit in that imposing office across from the man whose name had always made him clench his jaw in barely disguised jealousy, and realize that the wife he had underestimated had finally outplayed him. As I drifted into a fever-induced sleep, the image of Alex's face when he realized what he had done and who was representing me brought me more comfort than any medicine could provide. The pneumonia had weakened my body, but my resolve had never been stronger. Sometimes, rock bottom becomes the foundation on which you build your freedom. The next morning, I woke to sunlight filtering through the partially closed blinds and the distant sound of my phone buzzing. My fever had broken sometime during the night, leaving me drenched in sweat but clearer-headed than I had been in days. I reached for my phone, expecting to see a message from Alex, perhaps a perfunctory check-in that would ease his conscience. Instead, it was Donna. Checking on you. Need anything? I can drop by after my shift. Donna had been my rock through the worst of this illness, and, though she didn't know it yet, through the slow death of my marriage. As a nurse, she had provided practical help, administering IV antibiotics, checking my vitals, and bringing meals. As my oldest friend, she had provided something even more valuable, the quiet, non-judgmental presence I needed when the walls of my life were crumbling around me. I'm better, I texted back. Fever broke. Could use some company later. I set the phone down and forced myself to sit up, fighting the wave of dizziness that followed. Our bedroom, a space that had once been our sanctuary, now felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. The matching nightstands, the wedding photo still prominently displayed, though I'd long ago stopped looking at it, the his and hers robes hanging on the bathroom door. Everything in perfect order, just like our life appeared from the outside. Alex and I had been the couple everyone envied. He was the successful investment banker with the Midas touch. I was the accomplished art curator who had put my career on hold to support his. We attended the right parties, made the right connections, lived in the right neighborhood. Our life was a carefully constructed facade that had taken years to build and had been quietly crumbling for just as long. I shuffled to the bathroom, gripping the doorframe for support. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, pale skin, hollow cheeks, eyes that held a weariness that went beyond physical illness. But there was something else there too, something that had been missing for too long: determination. This pneumonia had been a wake-up call. 3 weeks ago, I had collapsed at a gallery opening, my lungs struggling for air, my body finally rebelling against the stress and neglect I had subjected it to. Alex had been there, schmoozing with potential clients, a glass of champagne in hand. He hadn't noticed me slip away to the bathroom, hadn't heard me gasping for breath, hadn't been the one to call the ambulance. That had been Claudette, a colleague who barely knew me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When he finally arrived at the hospital, 2 hours later, his first words weren't of concern, but of annoyance. Couldn't this have waited until after the Harrington deal was closed? They were about to sign. That moment, lying in the emergency room with oxygen tubes in my nose and my husband complaining about a missed opportunity, had crystallized everything I had been trying not to see. Now, as I shuffled back to bed, I realized that the routine of our marriage had become a prison. Wake up, prepare Alex's favorite breakfast, kiss him goodbye, spend my day making calls for his benefit, attend events as his accessory, listen to his day, massage his ego, repeat. Somewhere along the way, I had disappeared. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I wrapped my robe around me and made my way slowly down the stairs, gripping the banister for support. Donna stood on the porch, medical bag in one hand, grocery bag in the other. Her scrubs suggested she'd come straight from the hospital. "You look better," she said, assessing me with a professional eye as she entered. "Still too pale, but your breathing sounds clearer." I managed a smile. "Feel more human today," she set down her bags and pressed a hand to my forehead, a gesture more friendly than medical. "No fever. Good. Let's get some food in you." In the kitchen, where just yesterday Alex had unwittingly signed away our marriage, Donna moved with comfortable familiarity, pulling out pans and ingredients. I sat at the island counter, watching her efficient movements. "He left for Chicago," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Donna paused, wooden spoon in hand. "Let me guess. Important meeting? Networking opportunity? Couldn't possibly be rescheduled even though his wife has pneumonia?" I nodded, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. "He'll be gone until Tuesday. Or Wednesday." "Depends on the networking," we said in unison, and despite everything, I laughed. It felt foreign in my throat, that sound of genuine amusement. Donna resumed stirring the soup she was making, her back to me. "You know I've never liked him, right? Even before you married him. Even when everyone thought he hung the moon." "I know," I whispered. "I should have listened to you." She turned, her expression softening. "Hey, we all make choices we think are right at the time. What matters is what you do now." If only she knew what I had already done. That the papers Alex had signed weren't just insurance documents but the beginning of my liberation. That Tobias, whom Donna had always approved of, was already setting things in motion. That by the time Alex returned from Chicago, his comfortable life would be upended as dramatically as mine had been all those years ago, when I had sublimated everything I was for everything he wanted me to be. "I've been thinking a lot," I said carefully, "about making changes." Donna placed a bowl of soup in front of me, her eyes meeting mine. "What kind of changes?" I took a spoonful, buying time. The warmth spread through me, nurturing and healing. "Big ones," I finally answered. "The kind you can't take back." She smiled then, a slow spreading of lips that suggested she knew more than I had told her. "About damn time, Alicia. About damn time." And there it was. My name spoken with a warmth and familiarity that had been absent from Alex's voice for years. I was Alicia, not Mrs. Reynolds, not Alex's wife, but Alicia. A woman who had once had dreams of her own, ambitions of her own, a life of her own. A woman who was ready to reclaim all of it, starting with her name. As Donna and I sat in the kitchen, the soup warming me from the inside out, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The status quo of my marriage had been slow suffocation disguised as success. The pneumonia that had nearly killed me had, ironically, been the breath of life I needed to finally break free. The day after Alex left, I received the call that would irrevocably alter the course of our lives. I had been dozing on the couch, a half-read book splayed across my chest. when my phone vibrated against the coffee table. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled me to answer. Mrs. Reynolds? This is Amy Blackwell from Meridian Bank's fraud department. I sat up straighter, fully alert despite my lingering fatigue. Yes, this is Alicia Reynolds. I'm calling because we've detected some unusual activity on your joint accounts with Alexander Reynolds. Are you aware of any recent transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands? My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice remained steady. No, I'm not. What kind of transfers? There have been multiple transfers over the past 18 months, but a particularly large one was processed yesterday afternoon. Given the amount and destination, our system flagged it for review. Yesterday afternoon, while I lay sick in bed, while Alex was supposedly preparing for his conference in Chicago. How much? I asked, my fingers tightening around the phone. The woman hesitated. I'm not supposed to disclose specific amounts over the phone, but given the circumstances, we're talking about $1.2 million, Mrs. Reynolds. The room seemed to tilt momentarily. $1.2 million, most of our liquid assets. Money that had been earmarked for our future, for the family we had once planned to build, for the dreams we had shared in those early optimistic days. I see, I said, surprising myself with my composure. And this isn't the first transfer? No, ma'am, there have been smaller amounts moving to the same account since late 2022. Typically $50,000 to $100,000 at a time. Late 2022. Around the time Alex had started working with a new client, a beautiful venture capitalist named Veronica, who always seemed to need late-night meetings and weekend consultations. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Ms. Blackwell. What steps should I take next? We've temporarily frozen the account to prevent further transfers. You'll need to come into the branch with identification to discuss options. If you believe this is fraudulent activity, we can initiate an investigation. After ending the call, I sat motionless on the couch, the room silent except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Alex's parents, who had never quite warmed to me. Each tick seemed to count down the seconds of my marriage, a marriage that had apparently been on borrowed time far longer than I had realized. I had suspected Alex's infidelity. The late nights, the mysterious weekend trips, the perfume that wasn't mine. But financial betrayal. On this scale, this was something else entirely. This wasn't just a man straying. This was calculated, premeditated theft. From me. From our future. From the life we had supposedly been building together. With trembling hands, I pulled my laptop toward me and logged into our banking portal. The freeze on the account was evident immediately. A bold red banner across the top of the screen announcing, "Account temporarily unavailable. Please contact customer service." I bypassed it, navigating instead to our transaction history. There. It was, in stark black and white, $200,000 transferred to an account listed only as CRPS Holdings Layuftat. The transaction had been processed at 3:42 p.m. yesterday, precisely when Alex had been standing in our kitchen, signing divorce papers he hadn't bothered to read. I scrolled back through months of statements, my nausea growing with each discovery. Amy Blackwell hadn't been exaggerating. Since late 2022, Alex had been systematically siphoning money from our joint accounts. Small enough amounts to avoid immediate detection, but large enough to accumulate into a substantial nest egg. His nest egg. With her. I closed the laptop, my mind racing despite the fog of illness still clouding my thoughts. This wasn't just about Alex's betrayal anymore. This was about survival. He was preparing to leave me, financially gutted and emotionally devastated. The Chicago trip wasn't just another weekend with his mistress. It was preparation for a new life that didn't include me. With a newfound urgency, I reached for my phone again. The number I needed wasn't saved. I had deleted it years ago at Alex's insistence. But some combinations of digits are impossible to forget, especially when they once meant everything. Tobias answered on the second ring. Alicia? Everything. All right with the papers? The papers are fine, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But we have a complication. Alex transferred $1.2 million to an offshore account yesterday. The bank just called me. There was a brief silence before Tobias replied, his tone shifting from concerned ex-boyfriend to razor-sharp attorney. That's actually perfect timing. Did the bank freeze the account? Yes, but don't worry, he cut in. This works in our favor. It's evidence of financial misconduct during pending divorce proceedings. Even better that it happened the same day he signed the papers. I could almost see him, sitting in his corner office at Bennett & Associates, his expression calculating, as he adjusted his strategy. The man I had once loved and still trusted was now the weapon I needed to protect myself from the man I had married. What do I need to do? I asked. Nothing right now. Stay put. Focus on getting better. I'll send Owen over with documents for the bank, temporary power of attorney that will let us access records without you having to leave home. We'll expedite the emergency hearing. Owen was Tobias's investigator, a former forensic accountant with a knack for following money trails. If anyone could unravel Alex's financial web, it was him. Tobias, I said, my voice finally betraying a hint of the turmoil within. He's taken almost everything. No, Tobias corrected gently. He's tried to. There's a difference. And Alicia? He's not going to get away with it. I promise you that. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of our living room, the truth of my situation settling over me like a heavy cloak. The pneumonia that had seemed like the worst possible timing, striking just as I had finally gathered the courage to leave Alex, had actually been a twisted blessing. Had I been healthy, I might have noticed the transfer immediately, confronted him impulsively, tipped my hand before all the pieces were in place. Instead, my illness had provided the perfect cover. While Alex thought I was too weak to function, too dependent to act, I had been setting in motion the machinery that would ultimately dismantle his carefully constructed exit strategy. The room felt suddenly too small, too filled with reminders of the life I had lived as Mrs. Alexander Reynolds. The photographs on the mantel, the artwork we had selected together, the furniture chosen to impress his colleagues, all of it felt suffocating now. Artifacts of a museum exhibit titled, The Perfect Marriage, A Study in Deception? With effort, I stood and moved to the window, drawing a deep breath of the evening air. Outside, the neighborhood was coming to life with dinner preparations and evening walks, normal lives unfolding in normal ways. Soon I would rejoin them, not as Alex's perfectly curated wife, but as Alicia. Just Alicia. A woman reclaiming her life from the ashes of betrayal. The catalyst had arrived, not in the form I had expected, but perhaps in the form I needed. Alex's financial betrayal had converted my quiet determination into something harder, something uncompromising. There would be no second chances now, no possibility of reconciliation. The man who had vowed to cherish me in sickness and in health had instead chosen to rob me while I struggled to breathe. It was time to show him exactly who he had underestimated. That night, sleep eluded me despite my body's exhaustion. I lay awake in our California king bed, a bed that had never felt so vast and empty, staring at the shadows that danced across the ceiling as passing cars illuminated the room through the half-drawn curtains. My mind replayed the bank representatives' words on an endless loop. $1.2 million Cayman Islands, multiple transfers. The physical distance between Alex and me, him in Chicago, me in our Boston home, seemed minuscule compared to the emotional chasm that had been growing for years. But it was the revelation of his financial deception that finally crystallized everything. As dawn broke, casting soft pink light across the room, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't resignation or defeat, but something more profound. A clarity I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since our marriage began its slow decay, I could see the full picture without the distortions of hope or denial. I slowly sat up, wrapping myself in the cashmere throw that Donna had brought me. My lungs still ached with each deep breath, but the fog in my mind had lifted. I reached for the leather-bound journal on my nightstand, a gift from my grandmother that I had abandoned years ago when Alex had commented that successful people don't have time for navel-gazing. The first page remained as I had left it, blank and waiting. I uncapped my pen and began to write, not with the hesitation of someone unsure of her thoughts, but with the decisive strokes of a woman reclaiming her narrative. I married a stranger. Or perhaps more accurately, I married a man who became a stranger, slowly, deliberately, methodically transforming from the person I fell in love with into someone I no longer recognize. Did he change? Or was he always this person beneath the charm and attentiveness? Did I change, becoming someone so eager to please that I lost the ability to see clearly? As I wrote, memories surfaced, not just of the obvious red flags I had ignored, but of the subtle shifts that had occurred so gradually I'd barely noticed them. The way Alex had initially encouraged my career, only to suggest I take a break when his own professional ambitions demanded more support at home. The way he had slowly isolated me from friends who asked too many questions or showed too much concern. The way he had praised my independence in our courtship, only to systematically dismantle it after our vows. I recalled our 5th anniversary. I had planned a surprise weekend at the Coastal Inn where we'd spent our honeymoon. Alex had seemed distracted the entire drive, checking his phone constantly. When we arrived, he'd taken one look at the charming but modest accommodations and asked, "Couldn't you have booked something more impressive? The Doyles are in Nantucket this weekend. We could have networked." That night, I'd cried silently in the bathroom while he slept, wondering when making meaningful memories had become less important than making business connections. Even then, I had blamed myself for choosing sentiment over practicality, for not understanding his ambitions, for being disappointed when I should have been supportive. The woman I was before Alex would never have accepted this life, I continued. Writing, she would never have allowed someone to make her feel small or insufficient. She would never have stayed silent while her dreams were dismantled one by one. When did I stop being her? When did I become this shadow, decorative, accommodating, but ultimately insubstantial? My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, but the words kept flowing, years of unacknowledged truths pouring onto the page. I had become so adept at rationalizing Alex's behavior that I had lost the ability to recognize it for what it was. Emotional abandonment at best, calculated manipulation at worst. The transfer of $1.2 million wasn't just about money. It was the ultimate confirmation of what I had suspected but refused to fully acknowledge. I was disposable to him. After years of building a life together, he had been plotting his escape, ensuring he would leave with everything while I was left with nothing. But he miscalculated, I wrote, the pen pressing harder into the page. He assumed my illness would keep me blind and dependent. He underestimated me because I allowed him to. Because for years it was easier to be underestimated than to confront the reality of our marriage. That ends now. Outside, the neighborhood was coming to life. Garbage trucks rumbling down the street, early commuters warming up car engines, joggers passing with rhythmic footfalls on the sidewalk. The everyday symphony of lives moving forward. Soon, my life would move forward too, but on a different path than the one Alex had prescribed. I set down my pen and closed the journal, feeling lighter despite the gravity of my situation. The internal shift was profound, like a seismic realignment of everything I had believed about my marriage, my husband, and most importantly, myself. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had been avoiding since my diagnosis. "Alicia?" My mother's voice, warm and concerned, traveled across the miles from her home in Arizona. "Donna told me you've been sick. Why didn't you call?" "It's been complicated, Mom," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "But I'm calling now. I have pneumonia, and Alex and I are getting divorced." The silence on the other end lasted only a moment. "Which one should I address first?" she finally asked, in the practical manner that had always been her way. "The divorce," I said. "The pneumonia will pass." "About damn time," she replied, echoing Donna's sentiment from the day before. "I never said anything because you seemed determined to make it work, but that man has been draining the life out of you for years. I hardly recognize my daughter anymore when I visit." Tears welled in my eyes, not of sadness, but of validation. My mother, who had raised me to be independent and resilient after my father abandoned us, had seen what I had refused to see. "I know, Mom. I lost myself somewhere along the way." "Well, you're finding yourself again now, and that's what matters." Her voice softened. "Do you need me to come? I can be on a plane today." "Not yet," I said. "I need to handle some things first, but soon." After we hung up, I made my way carefully to the master bathroom. The woman in the mirror looked different than she had just 24 hours earlier. The physical symptoms of my illness remained: the pallor, the dark circles under my eyes, the weight loss that had hollowed my cheeks. But there was something new in my gaze. A resolve. A certainty. For years, I had been living with a slow-growing cancer in my marriage, ignoring the symptoms until they became too severe to dismiss. Alex's financial betrayal had been the final diagnostic, confirming what I had suspected but been afraid to name. Now that I knew, truly knew, there was only one course of treatment: complete excision. The revelation wasn't just that my husband had betrayed me. It was that I had betrayed myself by staying, by making excuses, by shrinking to fit the space he had allocated for me in his life. The woman who had once curated museum exhibits celebrating female artists who defied convention had somehow accepted a conventional cage of her own making. "No more," I whispered to my reflection, the words both a promise and a battle cry. In my weakened physical state, with pneumonia still rattling in my lungs, I had never felt stronger. The fever had burned away my illusions, leaving only the essential truth. I deserved better, and I was going to claim it. By mid-afternoon, I had enough energy to make my way downstairs and settle on the living room sofa. The house felt different now, no longer a beautifully designed prison, but a temporary way station on my journey toward freedom. I pulled a photo album from the built-in bookshelf, blowing dust from its cover. When was the last time I had looked at these pictures? 2 years? 3? I opened it to find our wedding photos staring back at me. Alex and I on the steps of the Boston Public Library, me in ivory lace, him in a tailored tuxedo. Both of us beaming. Both of us certain that we had found our forever. I traced my finger over my younger face. I had been 28, already making a name for myself in the art world, passionate and driven. Alex had been 32, a rising star at his investment, firm, charming everyone with his vision and ambition. Our meeting at a gallery opening had seemed serendipitous. He was representing a client interested in emerging artists. I was curating my first major exhibition. Our courtship had been a whirlwind of intellectual conversations, shared dreams, and undeniable chemistry. I remembered thinking I had found my equal, someone who valued my mind as much as my heart, who encouraged my ambitions as I encouraged his. I turned the page to find photos from our honeymoon in Santorini. Alex pointing excitedly at a map as we planned our day's exploration, me laughing as we tried unsuccessfully to take a selfie with the famous blue domes in the background. Both of us sun-kissed and relaxed, the future stretching before us like the endless Aegean. When had it changed? The shift had been so gradual that I couldn't pinpoint a single moment, a definitive before and after. But looking at these photos with fresh eyes, I could now see the warning signs I had missed or dismissed. I flipped forward to find pictures from our second anniversary. A dinner at an exclusive restaurant where Alex had spent more time networking with other diners than conversing with me. I remembered feeling disappointed but rationalizing it away. He was building his career, making connections that would benefit our future. The photo showed me smiling, but now I could see the uncertainty in my eyes, the slight tension in my posture. Another page. Our third Christmas together. We had hosted Alex's colleagues and their spouses, a dinner party that I had spent weeks planning. In the photos, our home looked like a magazine spread, and I was the perfect hostess in a designer dress I had purchased specifically for the occasion. What the pictures didn't show was Alex pulling me aside before guests arrived. Remember, the Harringtons just lost their bid on the Westfield property, so don't mention real estate. And for God's sake, don't go on about that feminist exhibit you're working on. Keep it light, keep it appealing. I had nodded, swallowing my objections. The exhibition he had dismissively referred to had been the culmination of 2 years' work, a showcase of overlooked female artists that had garnered attention from major critics. But that night, I had discussed the weather, complimented homes. I had never seen and laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I had made myself smaller, less substantial, more palatable, exactly as Alex had requested. I continued through the album, page after page revealing a pattern I had been blind to while living it. The photos showed a woman slowly disappearing, my smile becoming more practiced, less genuine, my posture increasingly deferential to Alex's presence, my style evolving to reflect his preferences rather than my own. There was the trip to Paris where he had spent most of our vacation on conference calls, leaving me to explore the Louvre alone. The dinner with my mother where he had barely engaged, checking his phone throughout the meal. The night of my gallery's biggest opening, when he had arrived 2 hours late and left early for an emergency client meeting that I later discovered, through a careless comment from a colleague, had been drinks with a potential investor. Most telling was what wasn't in the album: the gradual disappearance of my friends, my colleagues, my independent social life. The last group photo that included Donna was from 4 years ago. After that, the pictures featured exclusively Alex's circle, his colleagues, his clients, his carefully curated network of useful connections. I closed the album, the retrospective complete. The evidence was irrefutable. My marriage hadn't suddenly failed. It had been failing from the moment Alex decided that my primary value was in how I could advance his agenda. And I had allowed it, mistaking sacrifice for love, compromise for partnership. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my reflections. Through the peephole, I saw Owen, Tobias's trusted investigator. I opened the door to find him standing there, leather portfolio in hand, his expression professional but kind. Mrs. Reynolds? Owen Michaels from Bennett and Associates. Mr. Bennett. Sent me. Please come in. And it's Alicia, I said, stepping aside. I'm reclaiming my maiden name as soon as possible. Owen nodded, following me to the living room. Mr. Bennett mentioned you're recovering from pneumonia. We can keep this brief. I settled back onto the sofa while Owen took the armchair opposite me. Tobias said you have documents for me to sign? Yes. Temporary power of attorney for the banking records and an affidavit regarding the transfer you discovered. He opened his portfolio, extracting several neatly organized papers. But first, I'd like to ask a few questions about your husband's financial activities, if you're feeling up to it. I nodded, suddenly eager to piece together the puzzle of Alex's betrayal. What do you need to know? When did you first notice any changes in your husband's spending habits or financial discussions? The question sent me back through the timeline once more. Last year, he suggested we consolidate our accounts for tax efficiency. He presented it as a strategy recommended by his firm, but he was insistent in a way that seemed off. I paused, remembering the conversation over dinner. Before that, he started discouraging me from discussing our finances, said it stressed him out to rehash work at home. Owen made notes, his expression revealing nothing. And when did he begin traveling? More frequently? The Chicago trip started about 18 months ago, around the time he began working with Veronica Lindstrom's venture capital firm. I felt my cheeks flush, not with embarrassment, but with anger at my own naivety. I'm guessing she's more than a client. We're looking into all his connections, Owen replied diplomatically. What about purchases? Any significant spending that seemed unusual? I thought about the credit card statements I had stopped reviewing at Alex's request. He bought a new watch about a year ago, a Patek Philippe that cost more than my car. Said it was necessary for client perception, and there were hotel charges in Chicago that seemed excessive, even for luxury accommodations. Owen's pen moved methodically across his notepad. One last question. Did your husband ever mention investments or business interests outside the country? The question triggered a memory, a dinner party conversation I had nearly forgotten. Not directly to me, but at a gathering last fall. He was discussing offshore opportunities with a colleague. They stopped talking when I approached, but I heard him mention something about asset protection and Cayman banking laws. I assumed it was related to a client. Owen's expression shifted slightly, the first crack in his professional veneer. That's extremely helpful, Alicia. The timing aligns perfectly with the first transfers we've identified. As he guided me through the documents requiring my signature, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. Each signature was a step toward reclaiming what Alex had tried to take from me, not just financially, but emotionally, psychologically, fundamentally. When Owen finally stood to leave, portfolio now filled, with signed documents, he paused. Mr. Bennett wanted me to assure you, what your husband has done constitutes financial fraud during pending divorce proceedings. The judge will not look kindly on it. I nodded, rising shakily to walk him to the door. Thank you, Owen, not just for the legal assistance, but for... I searched for the right words, for treating me like someone capable of understanding her own situation. He smiled then, briefly breaking his professional demeanor. Mr. Bennett speaks very highly of you, said you were always the smartest person in any room, including when he was in it. After Owen left, I returned to the sofa, the weight of retrospection heavy but clarifying. The album had shown me the past I had lived. The documents I had just signed would help secure the future I deserved. That evening, as dusk settled over Boston, my phone rang with Alex's ringtone, a sound that once quickened my pulse with anticipation but now triggered a wave of revulsion. I stared at the screen, watching it illuminate with his name and the photo I had taken of him last Christmas. Smiling confidently in front of our elaborate tree, glass of scotch in hand, the very picture of success and contentment. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. The old Alicia would have. The Alicia who avoided confrontation, who measured her words carefully to avoid upsetting him. But that woman was fading more with each passing hour. I answered on the fourth ring. Hello, Alex. Hey, babe. His voice carried the false cheer he reserved for when he was with others. I could hear ambient noise in the background, clinking glasses, muted conversation, soft music. How are you feeling? Any better? Much better, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The fever's gone. I've been quite productive. Today, actually. That's great, he said, distracted. Listen, I'm in the middle of dinner with the Lindstrom team. Just wanted to check in. The conference is going well. We're making real progress with the Asian market strategy. I wondered if Veronica was sitting beside him, perhaps wearing the earrings he had purchased with our joint credit card last month, the ones delivered to his office that he didn't know I knew about. I'm sure you are, I said, infusing my voice, with just enough sweetness to mask the bitterness beneath. The Cayman banking laws must be fascinating. There was a split second of silence, barely perceptible to anyone who didn't know him well, but unmistakable to me. What? Nothing important, I replied lightly. Just something I remembered from a conversation you had at the Harringtons' dinner last fall. About asset protection. Another beat of silence. Longer this time. That was about a client, Alicia. Of course it was. I paused, savoring the moment. Oh, by the way, Meridian Bank called today. Something about unusual activity on our accounts. I told them I'd come in to discuss it when I'm feeling stronger. His voice changed then, dropping to a near whisper. What did they say exactly? Just that there were some transfers they wanted to verify. Nothing to worry about, I'm sure. I mean, you handle our finances so capably. I could practically hear his mind racing, calculating how much I knew, how much the bank had revealed, how much time he had to rectify the situation. Look, I should probably call them directly, he said, his casual tone forced. It's probably just routine, but with the amounts we deal with, sometimes their system flags ordinary transactions. I'll handle it. No need, I replied. I've already signed the authorization forms. The bank examiner seemed quite interested in the pattern of transactions to CRPS Holdings. This time, the silence was profound. When he spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of warmth. You're going through our financial records while I'm away working to support us? What's gotten into you, Alicia? The old me would have backpedaled immediately, apologizing for overstepping, accepting his implied accusation that I was being irrational or inappropriate. But that woman, the one who had gradually surrendered her autonomy to maintain peace, was no longer in control. Pneumonia, I said simply. It has a way of bringing clarity, almost like a fever dream where suddenly everything makes sense. The late nights, the weekend trips, the growing distance, the financial secrecy. It's remarkable how much you can see when you're forced to be still. You're not well, he said, his tone shifting to the condescending concern he had perfected over the years. The medications they've given you can cause confusion, paranoia. Even? We'll talk about this when I get home. You should rest. I almost laughed at the predictability of it, the immediate attempt to undermine my perception, to cast me as unstable and unreliable. How many times had this tactic worked before? How many legitimate concerns had I abandoned because he had convinced me I was being irrational? You know what's interesting, Alex? I kept my voice conversational, as if discussing an article I'd read. I've spent years doubting myself, questioning my instincts, deferring to your judgment. But it turns out I was right all along. You just made me believe I wasn't. This is ridiculous, he said, anger now bleeding through his carefully constructed facade. I'm cutting my trip short. We clearly need to talk face to face. I'll be on the first flight tomorrow. Don't bother, I replied. I won't be here. What are you talking about? Where would you go? You're sick, Alicia. You need to be home. The concern in his voice might have seemed genuine to anyone else, but I recognized it for what it was. Panic at losing control of the situation, of me. I'm not going anywhere physically, I clarified. But the woman you're expecting to find when you return, the compliant, unquestioning wife who looks the other way while you dismantle our life together, she's gone. She's been gone for a while now, actually. I just finally noticed. The background. Noise on his end had faded, suggesting he had moved to a more private location. You're being dramatic. Whatever you think is happening is exactly what's happening, I finished for him. And here's something else that's happening. Those papers you signed before you left? They weren't insurance documents. What? His voice had dropped to a dangerous pitch I knew well, the tone that usually preceded his most effective manipulations, the ones that left me questioning my own reality. They were divorce papers, Alex, meticulously prepared by a lawyer who knows exactly what he's doing. You didn't even read them, just signed wherever I indicated, because why would you need to read something your wife asked you to sign? Why would you need to pay attention to the details of our life together? The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the sound of breathing came through the connection. I could imagine him standing in some hotel corridor, his perfectly tailored suit suddenly feeling too tight, his practiced confidence evaporating as the implications of what I'd just said sank in. "You're lying," he finally managed, but the uncertainty in his voice told me he was already reviewing the memory, already wondering if he had indeed been so careless, so arrogant, so certain of his control that he had signed away his marriage, without realizing it. "Check your email," I said quietly. "I had Tobias send the confirmation of filing an hour ago. It's quite official." "Tobias?" The name came out strangled. "Tobias Bennett? Your ex-boyfriend Tobias?" "The very same. He sends his regards." "Well, not really, but he's certainly looking forward to seeing you in court." I could almost see Alex's face, the way the color would drain from it, the way his jaw would clench, the way his eyes would narrow, as he tried to regain his footing in a situation spinning rapidly beyond his control. "You've lost your mind," he said, but the accusation lacked conviction. "This won't hold up. No judge will, except that you committed financial fraud during divorce proceedings, attempted to hide assets offshore, systematically gaslit your wife while emptying your joint accounts. I think you'll find they take a rather dim view of all of it, actually." I stood up from the sofa where I had been sitting, suddenly needing to move, to physically embody the shift that was occurring within me. Each step across our living room felt like a step away from the woman I had been, and toward the woman I was reclaiming. "This conversation is over," I said, not with anger, but with finality. "Anything else you have to say, you can say to my lawyer. Goodbye, Alex." I ended the call before he could respond, slipping the phone into my pocket with hands that trembled not from fear but from a potent mixture of adrenaline and liberation. The decision I had been building toward for months, perhaps years, had finally been made explicit, not just to myself, but to Alex. There was no going back now, no possibility of reconciliation, no chance of him talking me out of it, no path back to the cage I had once mistaken for security. The turning point had arrived, and I had finally, irrevocably, turned. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my doorbell. I glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. Too early for a casual visitor, too late for an emergency. I wrapped my robe around me and made my way downstairs, still moving slowly but with more strength than I'd had in days. Through the peephole, I saw Owen standing on my porch, leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder, 2 coffee cups in a cardboard tray balanced in one hand. I opened the door, greeting him with a puzzled smile. "Mr. Bennett thought you might need these today," he said, offering the coffee tray. "The documents came through from the bank faster than expected." I accepted the coffee gratefully. "Come in. I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon." Owen followed me to the kitchen, where he set his bag on the island counter. "Your husband made some calls last night. Several calls, actually. To the bank, to his attorney, to the offshore account manager. We've been monitoring the activity." I took a sip of the coffee, prepared exactly as I liked it, with almond milk and a hint of cinnamon. Tobias had remembered after all these years. The realization was oddly comforting. "Is that legal?" I asked. "The monitoring?" Owen's expression remained professionally neutral. "Let's just say we have reliable sources. The important thing is that he's panicking, which means he's making mistakes, and we need to gather as much information as possible before he covers his tracks." He opened his messenger bag and spread several folders across the counter. "Financial records from the past 3 years, credit card statements, investment accounts, real estate holdings, some in names you probably don't recognize." I leafed through the first folder, my stomach tightening at what I found. Statements from an account I'd never seen before, in the name of Alexander Reynolds and Veronica Lindstrom. Joint investments, property searches for homes in Chicago, homes I had never been told about, much less asked to consider. "How did you get all this?" I asked, moving to the next folder. "Mr. Bennett has specialized resources for cases like this. And your husband hasn't been particularly careful. He's been operating under the assumption that you weren't paying attention. That stung. Not because it was unfair, but because it was so painfully accurate. I hadn't been paying attention, not to the financial manipulations, not to the gradual erosion of our partnership, not to the subtle ways Alex had trained me to look away from what I didn't want to see. There's more, Owen said, opening another folder. Emails between your husband and Ms. Lindstrom dating back almost 2 years. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the papers. Did I really want to see the intimate details of their relationship? The words they had exchanged while I was obliviously playing the role of devoted wife? You don't have to read them, Owen assured me, noting my hesitation. But they contain discussions about financial planning that will be relevant to your case. I steeled myself and began scanning the emails. Most were mundane, discussions about investments, property viewings, scheduling arrangements. But scattered among them were personal exchanges that confirmed what I had suspected. Their relationship was far more than professional. Miss waking up next to you. 3 more days and we won't have to hide anymore. She doesn't suspect anything. Too caught up in her gallery projects to notice my schedule. The Cayman account is almost ready. Once everything's transferred, we'll have our fresh start. Each message was like a physical blow, but I forced myself to continue. This wasn't just about gathering evidence for the divorce. It was about facing the truth I had been avoiding for too long. There's something else you should see, Owen said, opening his laptop. Your husband's recent search history from his work computer. He turned the screen toward me. The list was revealing in its desperation. Can divorce papers be invalidated if signed under false pretenses? How to reverse bank account freeze. Tobias Bennett attorney track record. Challenging offshore account disclosure and divorce. Flights from Chicago to Boston today. He's looking for loopholes, I said, a strange calm settling over me. Ways to undo what's been done. Yes, but he won't find them, Owen replied. Mr. Bennett was extremely thorough. The papers you had him sign were legally binding, properly witnessed and notarized after his signature was obtained. The financial fraud evidence is substantial. And most importantly, we moved quickly enough to freeze the assets before he could further conceal them. I closed the email folder, having seen enough. What happens next? We continue gathering information, financial records, communications, witness statements from anyone who can corroborate the timeline of events. Mr. Bennett has scheduled an emergency hearing for Friday morning regarding the financial aspects of the case. And Alex? When will he be served with the official notice? Owen checked his watch. The process server should be meeting his flight at Logan in approximately 3 hours. I couldn't help but imagine the scene. Alex, striding confidently through the terminal, perhaps rehearsing the manipulative arguments he would use to regain control of me and our marriage, only to be stopped by a stranger handing him legal documents confirming that his carefully constructed world was crumbling. There's one more thing we need, Owen said, pulling out a small digital recorder. Your statement, in your own words, about when you became aware of the financial deception and your understanding of the divorce papers he signed. I nodded, suddenly grateful for my legal background before I'd left my career to support Alex's. I understood the importance of establishing my credibility and timeline. I'm ready, I said, sitting straighter despite the persistent ache in my lungs. Where should I begin? By late afternoon, Owen had departed with my recorded statement, leaving me with copies of the evidence folders and instructions to rest. But rest was impossible. My mind was too full, processing the concrete confirmation of what I had suspected, but never fully allowed myself to acknowledge. I was brewing tea in the kitchen when my phone chimed with a text from Donna. Stopping by. In 20, bringing soup. No arguments. When she arrived, bearing not just soup but also fresh flowers and a stack of magazines, her eyes immediately went to the folders spread across my kitchen island. Well, someone's been busy, she said, setting down her offerings. You look better. Still pale, but your eyes have that spark again. I managed a smile, the first genuine one in days. I feel more like myself than I have in years. Donna raised an eyebrow as she unpacked the soup container. Does this have anything to do with those very official-looking papers? I hesitated, then decided Donna deserved the truth. She had been witnessing the slow disintegration of my marriage for years, offering quiet support without judgment. Alex signed divorce papers before he left for Chicago. He thought they were insurance documents. Donna froze mid-motion, soup ladle hovering over the pot she'd just placed on the stove. He what? And I discovered he's been transferring money to offshore accounts, over $1 million, with his girlfriend. The ladle clattered against the pot as Donna abandoned all pretense of food preparation and came around the island to where I sat. Start from the beginning, every detail. So I did. I told her about the bank's call, about the papers Alex had signed without reading, about Tobias Bennett and his investigator Owen, about the emails between Alex and Veronica, about the properties. In Chicago, about everything I had discovered in the past 48 hours. Donna listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger, to a fierce, protective pride. When I finished, she reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. You magnificent, brilliant woman, she said. I've been waiting years for you to see who he really is. You knew? Not the specifics, but the pattern? She nodded. Everyone who loves you could see it, Alicia. The way he slowly isolated you, diminished you, made you doubt yourself. The way you stopped mentioning your own ambitions, started qualifying your opinions with Alex thinks or Alex says. But we couldn't tell you. You had to see it for yourself. The confirmation hit me harder than I expected. My transformation hadn't happened in isolation. Others had been witnessing it all along, concerned but powerless to intervene until I was ready to recognize the truth. There's something else, Donna said, hesitating. Something I probably should have told you a long time ago. I braced myself. What is it? 2 years ago, at that fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, the one Alex couldn't attend because of his emergency client meeting, I saw him at the Ritz with a woman. They were intimate, not just colleagues having a drink. I absorbed this, surprised by my lack of reaction. Veronica Lindstrom, blonde, expensively understated, looks like she does Pilates twice a day? Donna nodded. I almost told you then, but you were so excited about the gallery expansion, and Alex had just been so supportive of it. At least that's what you told me. I convinced myself maybe I was misinterpreting what I saw. You weren't, I said quietly. And he wasn't supportive of the expansion. He told me it was a waste of time and resources, but I went ahead anyway. It was the last time I did something significant without his approval. After that, it just seemed easier to conform. Donna turned back to the stove, stirring the soup with unnecessary vigor. I should have said something. We all should have. It wouldn't have mattered, I admitted. I wasn't ready to hear it. I was still too invested in the illusion. We fell, silent. The only sound the gentle bubbling of soup and the ticking of the kitchen clock, the one Alex had insisted we replace because the original, which I had loved, was too quaint for a home of this caliber. As Donna ladled soup into bowls, my phone rang. Tobias. Alex's flight landed an hour ago, he said without preamble when I answered. He's been served. His attorney has already called me demanding an immediate meeting. What did you tell him? I asked, mouthing Tobias to Donna, who nodded and moved. Discreetly to the living room to give me privacy, that we'll see them in court on Friday, and that any attempt by Alex to enter your home or contact you directly will result in a restraining order. I exhaled slowly. Will that be necessary? Possibly. He's not taking this well. The process server reported that he became extremely agitated, made threats, demanded to know how I became involved. I could picture it clearly. Alex, always so composed in public, finally losing the carefully maintained facade that had fooled so many for so long. "Is he on his way here?" I asked, a flutter of anxiety in my chest. "No," Tobias replied firmly. "He went directly to his lawyer's office. Owen is monitoring the situation. But Alicia, you should know. There was a woman with him. Young, blonde. They were arguing intensely after he was served." "Veronica," I said, the confirmation landing with strange finality. "His girlfriend, partner, whatever she is." "I'm sending Paul to your house," Tobias continued. "He'll be discreet, but I want security present until we're sure Alex is going to respect the boundaries we've established." Paul, Tobias's brother, a former police officer who now handled security for the firm. I had met him once during my relationship with Tobias, found him steady and unobtrusive. "Is that really necessary?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes," Tobias said simply. "Alex has lost control of the narrative. Men like him don't respond well to that. I'd rather be overly cautious than regretful." After we hung up, I rejoined Donna in the living room, the reality of my situation settling around me like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about ending a marriage anymore. It was about navigating the potentially volatile reaction of a man who had just discovered that his carefully constructed world and his control over me had shattered irreparably. "Everything okay?" Donna asked, concern evident in her expression. I nodded slowly. "It's official now. He knows. He's been served." Donna set down her soup spoon. "Do you want me to stay tonight?" The offer, simple, practical, loving, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. After years of Alex's emotional absence, the genuine concern from those who truly cared for me was almost overwhelming. "Yes," I admitted, allowing myself to accept the support. "I think I do." By Wednesday morning, my physical strength was returning, though the emotional toll of the past days had left me exhausted in other ways. Paul had arrived the previous evening, a tall, broad-shouldered man with Tobias's observant eyes, but none of his courtroom polish. He had set up discreetly in the guest house, a presence both reassuring and surreal. "Your husband's attorney has filed emergency motions," Tobias informed me during our morning call. "They're claiming the divorce filing was fraudulent, that you misrepresented the documents." I sat at the kitchen island, fingers wrapped around a mug of tea. "That's predictable. What's our response?" "We anticipated this move," Tobias replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. The notarization and witness signatures were all properly executed after he signed. More importantly, we have evidence that this was hardly the first time he signed legal documents without reading them. He's got a documented pattern of signing whatever is put in front of him: corporate minutes, tax documents, even real estate, paperwork. "The arrogance of assumed control," I murmured. "Exactly. His own behavior is his undoing. Now, we need to discuss strategy for Friday's hearing. The judge assigned to our case is Catherine Reeves. She's fair but doesn't tolerate theatrics, and she has a particular distaste for financial manipulation in divorce proceedings." I knew Judge Reeves by reputation, a no-nonsense jurist with 20 years on the bench and a history of protecting financially disadvantaged spouses in divorce proceedings. It was a favorable assignment for our case. "What should I expect?" I asked. "Alex and his attorney will try to portray you as unstable, manipulative, someone taking advantage of his trust during a vulnerable time when you were ill. They'll argue that the paper signing was a form of entrapment." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the automatic response to criticism that Alex had conditioned in me over years. The reaction was physical before it was emotional: shortness of breath, racing pulse, the instinctive need to explain myself, to apologize, to make myself smaller to accommodate his narrative. I recognized it now for what it was: the lingering, effective subtle emotional manipulation. I took a deep breath, focusing on the facts rather than the feeling. And our counter? We present evidence of his systematic financial deception, his infidelity, and his attempt to drain joint accounts while you were seriously ill. We emphasize that you merely presented papers for signature. You didn't force him to sign without reading. His carelessness doesn't constitute your fraud. The strategy was sound, logical, but something about it felt incomplete. I don't want to just defend myself, I said slowly. I want to be proactive. This isn't just about responding to his accusations, it's about establishing the full reality of our marriage. Tobias was quiet for a moment. What do you have in mind? Glanced at the folders on the counter. Evidence of Alex's betrayal neatly categorized and labeled. But there was more to this story than what could be found in financial records and email exchanges. I want to present a timeline, not just of his financial misconduct, but of the pattern of control and isolation. The way he gradually separated me from my support network, discouraged my career, undermined my confidence. Emotional abuse, Tobias said quietly. It's relevant but harder to document than financial fraud. Not necessarily, I replied, an idea forming. I kept journals for years, until Alex suggested they were a waste of time. I have emails where he critiques my appearance before important events, texts where he dismisses my concerns or gaslights me about arrangements we've made. And I have witnesses, Donna, my mother, even former colleagues who saw the transformation happen. This could strengthen our case significantly, Tobias said, his voice taking on the focused tone I remembered from years ago, the one that indicated he was mentally constructing a legal strategy. Judge Reeves responds to comprehensive narratives, not just isolated incidents. There's something else, I added. I want to request a psychological evaluation for both of us. Alex will refuse, positioning it as an invasion of privacy, but his reaction alone will speak volumes. That's unexpected, Tobias admitted, but potentially powerful. It positions you as someone with nothing to hide, while putting him in the difficult position of having to explain his resistance. As we continued developing our approach, I felt a growing sense of clarity and purpose. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle or securing a favorable financial settlement. It was about reclaiming my narrative, the truth of what had happened in my marriage and who I had been forced to become within it. By the time our call ended, we had outlined a comprehensive strategy that went beyond reactive defense to proactive revelation. I would not merely be responding to Alex's accusations. I would be telling my complete story, the gradual erosion of my autonomy, the subtle but persistent undermining of my confidence, the systematic isolation that had left me vulnerable to his control. Donna returned mid-morning with groceries and a determined expression. Tobias called me, she explained, asked if I'd be willing to provide a statement about what I've observed in your marriage over the years. I nodded. If you're comfortable with that. Comfortable? She snorted, unpacking vegetables with unnecessary force. I've been biting my tongue for years watching him diminish you. It will be a relief to finally speak the truth. As she organized the refrigerator, a small act of practical care that nearly brought me to tears, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. This is Claudette from the gallery. Heard you've been ill. Also heard rumors about you and Alex. If you need a character witness regarding how he spoke to you at the Thompson opening, or how he reacted when Barstow wanted to feature your curation in Art Forum, I'm available. Some things shouldn't be forgotten. I stared at the message, momentarily stunned. Claudette and I had worked together briefly before I stepped back from my curatorial role, but we had never been close. Yet here she was, offering support, validating my experience, providing another thread in the tapestry of evidence. I forwarded the text to Tobias, adding, There may be others willing to speak to the pattern. Should we reach out? His response was immediate. Absolutely. The more voices corroborating the emotional landscape of your marriage, the stronger our position. By late afternoon, Owen had arrived with additional documentation, bank statements showing suspicious transfers dating back further than we had initially discovered, credit card receipts for jewelry never given to me, reservations at restaurants I had never visited. "We're building a compelling case," he assured me, arranging the documents in meticulous order. "But Mr. Bennett believes personal testimony will be equally important. The financial evidence demonstrates what he did. The personal accounts will illuminate who he is." As Owen walked me through the documents, explaining the legal significance of each one, I felt a strange sense of detachment. These papers, cold, factual, irrefutable, told the story of my husband's betrayal in black and white. But they couldn't capture the human cost of that betrayal, the lonely nights, the diminished self-worth, the gradual surrender of my own identity to maintain the peace. That part of the story would come from me, from my voice, finally unsilenced and ready to speak the truth. Thursday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. My lungs still ached when I breathed deeply, but the mental fog that had enshrouded me for so long, the constant second-guessing, the careful modulation of my thoughts and feelings to accommodate Alex's expectations, had lifted completely. Stood in our walk-in closet, surveying the carefully curated wardrobe that Alex had gradually shaped through gifts that replaced items he deemed unsuitable. The designer suits in muted colors that wouldn't overshadow his presence at events. The conservative dresses that projected the appropriate image of an investment banker's wife. The sensible heels that wouldn't make me taller than him in photographs. Methodically, I began removing them from their hangers, sorting them into piles. Donate, consign, keep. The keep pile was noticeably smaller, only items I had chosen for myself, pieces that reflected my taste rather than Alex's specifications. Donna arrived as I was filling the third donation bag. She surveyed the scene with approval. "About time. I never understood why you let him turn you into a banker's mannequin." "I didn't either," I admitted. "Not until now. We worked together, emptying the closet of the person I had been molded to become. When the task was complete, only a fraction of the clothing remained, but every piece was genuinely mine." By midday, Tobias called with updates on our strategy implementation. "We've filed the additional affidavits from Donna and Claudette. 3 more of your former colleagues have come forward with statements about Alex's controlling behavior at work functions. Your mother's statement arrived this morning, remarkably detailed for someone who only saw you a few times a year." "She noticed more than I realized," I said, thinking of my mother's text from the previous night. "I kept a record of every time he diminished you in my presence. Date, time, exact words. Never thought I'd get to use it." "The psychological evaluation request has been filed as well," Tobias continued. "As expected, Alex's attorney has already objected, claiming it's unnecessary and intrusive." "And the financial investigation?" "Proceeding exactly as planned. The forensic accountant has traced most of the missing funds. Alex made a critical error yesterday, tried to access the frozen accounts again, which triggered additional security protocols. The bank has provided complete documentation of his attempts to circumvent the hold. Each piece of news confirmed that our strategy was working. We weren't just responding to Alex's moves, we were anticipating them, channeling his predictable reactions into further evidence of his character and intentions. "There's one more thing," Tobias added, his tone shifting slightly. "Alex attempted to contact you directly. He sent an email to your personal account about an hour ago." My heart rate quickened. "What did it say?" "The usual manipulation. Claims he's worried about your mental health, suggests you're being influenced by people who don't have your best interests at heart, namely me. Offers to forgive your actions. If you dismiss the divorce petition immediately, Says he knows you're not yourself because of your illness. I almost laughed at the predictability of it. Alex's playbook had always been consistent. Undermine my perception, question my judgment, position himself as the reasonable party willing to overlook my transgressions. It had worked countless times before, causing me to doubt myself, to apologize for legitimate concerns, to retreat from confrontation. Forward it to Owen for the documentation file, I instructed. It's perfect evidence of his tactics. After the call ended, I moved to the home office, Alex's domain, where he had insisted on keeping all our important documents organized in a system only he fully understood. The massive mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface perpetually clear of anything that might suggest actual work took place there. It was for show, like so much of our life together. I sat in his custom leather chair, momentarily struck by the symbolism of occupying the space he had declared off-limits to me years ago. Financial matters are stressful enough without your questions, he had said when I'd expressed interest in understanding our investments better. Let me handle this part. You focus on making our social life perfect. The desk drawers opened smoothly, revealing meticulously labeled folders. I began reviewing them systematically, separating personal documents I needed from the financial and legal papers Tobias's team would require. Each document told a story. Property deeds with only Alex's name despite joint purchases, investment accounts I had never been consulted about, tax returns with questionable deductions. I photographed everything before reorganizing it, sending the images directly to Owen's secure server. This methodical documentation felt empowering, converting what had once been Alex's tools of control into evidence of his deception. By late afternoon, Paul appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. There's a Ms. Lindstrom at the gate. Says she needs to speak with you urgently. I froze, the folder in my hands suddenly heavy. Veronica, Alex's partner in both infidelity and financial fraud, here at my home. Did she say what she wants? Paul shook his head. Only that it's important and concerns both you and Alex. I considered my options. Refusing to see her would be the safer choice, the one Tobias would undoubtedly recommend. But something, curiosity, perhaps, or a desire to finally put a voice to the woman who had existed as a shadow in my marriage, prompted me to nod. Let her in. We'll talk in the sunroom. As Paul went to admit her, I texted Donna, who was out picking up lunch. Veronica. Lindstrom is here, meeting her in the sunroom. Stay with Paul when you return. Then I sent a quick message to Tobias. VL has arrived unannounced. Meeting her briefly. Paul is present. We'll record conversation per your protocol. I activated the voice recorder on my phone, slipped it into my pocket, and made my way to the sunroom at the back of the house. Through the glass doors, I could see Paul escorting a slender blonde woman across the garden path. She moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention, her designer outfit impeccable, her expression carefully composed. This was the woman Alex had chosen over me. Or perhaps more accurately, the woman who represented what Alex had always wanted. Someone who complimented rather than challenged his vision of himself. I straightened my shoulders, took a steadying breath, and prepared to face the other woman in what had apparently been a three-person marriage for longer than I had realized. The meeting with Veronica had been brief, but revelatory. She hadn't come as Alex's advocate, but as a woman experiencing her own awakening. The offshore accounts she'd explained weren't just about hiding assets from me. Alex had been systematically skimming from her investment firm as well. When confronted with evidence of his deception after receiving the divorce papers, he had turned on her, employing the same gaslighting techniques that had kept me compliant for years. I thought I was special, she had said, her composure cracking slightly. I thought you were the problem in his life. I was wrong. I'd felt no satisfaction in her disillusionment, only a strange kinship. Two women manipulated by the same man, both finally seeing the truth. After she left, I stood in the center of our living room, suddenly unable to tolerate another moment, surrounded by the carefully curated symbols of our marriage. Every piece of furniture, every artwork, every decorative object had been selected to project the image Alex wanted the world to see. Affluent, sophisticated, controlled. None of it reflected who I truly was or what I valued. With newfound energy that belied my recovering state, I began to transform the space. First, I removed his portraits from the walls, the commissioned oil painting that hung above the fireplace, the professional photographs that dotted the hallway. Each one showed Alex in perfect lighting, impeccable clothing, the embodiment of success. I stacked them carefully in the garage, not out of respect, but out of legal prudence. Next came the artifacts of his dominance, the awards and recognitions displayed prominently on bookshelves, the business magazines that had featured him preserved. In custom frames, the collection of scotch bottles too expensive to actually drink arranged in the bar cabinet like trophies. In their place, I hung artwork I had stored away years ago when Alex had deemed them too provocative or insufficiently sophisticated. Bold paintings by female artists I had once championed in my curatorial work. Photographs I had taken during our early relationship, before he convinced me my hobby was amateurish. A tapestry my mother had woven that Alex had relegated to the guest room because it didn't match our aesthetic. As the physical environment transformed, I felt my inner landscape shifting as well. Each object removed was a weight lifted. Each personal treasure reclaimed was a piece of myself recovered. Donna returned with lunch to find me rearranging the living room furniture, pushing the formal seating arrangement that had never been comfortable but had photographed well for design magazines into a more intimate, conversational grouping. "Need help?" she asked, setting down the takeout bags. "Actually, yes," I replied, wiping sweat from my brow. "Can you help me bring up my grandmother's reading chair from the basement?" Alex thought it was too shabby for the main floor. By evening, the transformation was significant. The house still contained the expensive furnishings Alex had insisted upon, but they were now arranged according to my preference, supplemented with personal items that told my story rather than his. The sterile showcase had become a home. Imperfect, eclectic, but authentically mine. Paul, maintaining his discreet presence, raised an eyebrow at the changes but said nothing. Tobias, calling for our nightly strategy review, noticed the different background on our video call immediately. "You've been redecorating," he observed. "Reclaiming," I corrected. "Making this space mine until I decide where I want to be long-term." He nodded, understanding immediately. "How does it feel?" I glanced around at the transformed room, at the visible evidence of my own agency reasserted. Like breathing fresh air after being underwater for years. The night before the court hearing, sleep eluded me. I sat on the window seat in my bedroom, no longer our bedroom, but truly mine, watching the steady rain that had been falling since sunset. The weather seemed appropriate, a cleansing downpour before the confrontation to come. Tomorrow, I would face Alex across a courtroom. Not as his supportive wife, not as the carefully cultivated accessory to his success, but as his adversary. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. My phone buzzed with a text from Tobias. "Everything is in place for tomorrow. Try to get some rest." The simple message carried layers of meaning beyond its practical advice. Tobias had always been perceptive about my emotional state, even years ago when we were together. He would know I was sitting awake, mentally rehearsing every possible scenario for the hearing. I texted back, attempting the impossible. His response came quickly. "The hardest part is already done. You broke free. The rest is just paperwork." I smiled at the deliberate understatement. We both knew tomorrow would be far more than paperwork. It would be the first public acknowledgement of the truth, that my marriage had been built on deception, that Alex was not the man he pretended to be. that I was reclaiming my life from his control. I tried to imagine how Alex would appear in court. Would he maintain the charming, reasonable facade that had fooled so many for so long? Or would the mask slip, revealing the coldly calculating man I had glimpsed in unguarded moments? Would he be confident in his ability to regain control? Or, desperate at the realization that his carefully constructed world was crumbling? More importantly, how would I appear? The thought sent a wave of anxiety through me. For years, I had calibrated my public presence according to Alex's expectations. Speak softly, defer elegantly, support unconditionally. Tomorrow would require something entirely different. I moved to the closet, now half empty after my purge, of Alex-approved clothing. For the hearing, I had selected an outfit that would have been unthinkable during my marriage. A sharply tailored crimson suit that Alex had always claimed was too aggressive for his wife. The color would stand out starkly in the subdued environment of the courtroom, a visual declaration of my reclaimed identity. Downstairs, I could hear Paul making his security rounds, the quiet professionalism of his movements, a reminder that I was protected. In the guest room, Donna slept, having insisted on staying until after the hearing. Their presence, steady, supportive, undemanding, was another stark contrast to the relationship I was dismantling. My phone buzzed again, an email notification. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting another manipulation attempt from Alex. Instead, it was from Claudette, the gallery colleague who had offered to testify. Just wanted to say I'm thinking of you ahead of tomorrow. Whatever happens in court, know that watching you reclaim your voice has been inspiring to more people than you realize. The art world misses your curatorial vision. The simple validation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I had been so isolated in my marriage, so convinced that my retreat from my career had gone unnoticed, that the reminder of my professional identity felt like rediscovering a lost treasure. As midnight approached, I returned to bed, not expecting sleep, but needing to rest my still recovering body. Tomorrow would require all my strength, physical, emotional, intellectual. In the darkness, I mentally rehearsed what I would say if given the opportunity to address the court directly. Not the carefully scripted statement Tobias and I had prepared, but the raw truth I had only recently allowed myself to acknowledge. I had been diminished by increments so subtle I hadn't recognized my own disappearance until I was nearly gone. Tomorrow wasn't just about financial justice or legal vindication. It was about reclaiming my narrative, my voice, myself. The digital clock on my nightstand turned to midnight. Friday had arrived, the day I would face Alex not as his wife, but as a woman who had finally recognized her own worth. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, the wood paneling darker, the air heavier. I sat beside Tobias at the plaintiff's table, my crimson suit a defiant splash of color in the otherwise muted environment. Though still weak from my illness, I sat with my spine straight, hands folded calmly on the table, the picture of composed determination. When Alex entered with his attorney, Marshall Winters, a shark-like litigator known for aggressive tactics, I kept my gaze steady, refusing to look away. He faltered slightly when he saw me, his confident stride breaking rhythm. For just a moment. This wasn't the Alicia he had expected, the accommodating, uncertain woman who had lived in his shadow for years. The realization registered in his eyes before his mask of self-assurance slipped back into place. But I had seen it. That flicker of recognition, of doubt. And I knew then that regardless of the legal outcome, I had already won the most important battle, the one for my own identity. Alex wore his court appearance like another carefully tailored suit, somber, respectable, the very picture of a wronged husband. As he settled at the defendant's table, he attempted to catch my eye, his expression arranged in a familiar configuration of concern and affection, the look he had perfected for public consumption. I met his gaze without emotion, then deliberately turned my attention to the papers before me. His manipulative toolkit wouldn't work today. He was performing for an audience that no longer existed. Judge Reeves entered, a silver-haired woman with piercing eyes and efficient movements. After the formalities, she addressed the core issue directly. This is an emergency hearing regarding alleged financial misconduct during pending divorce proceedings, she stated, reviewing the file before her. Mr. Reynolds, your attorney has filed a motion claiming the divorce papers were signed under false pretenses. Mrs. Reynolds, your attorney has countered with evidence of systematic financial fraud. Let's address the signature issue first. Marshal Winters rose, his voice oozing with practiced indignation. Your Honor, my client was deceived into signing documents he believed were related to medical insurance. This constitutes fraud and invalidates the entire filing. Tobias stood, his calm presence a stark contrast to Winters' theatrical outrage. Your Honor, Mrs. Reynolds never misrepresented the documents. Mr. Reynolds chose not to read what he was signing. A pattern of behavior we've documented extensively. The responsibility lies with the signatory, not the presenter. Judge Reeves turned her penetrating gaze to Alex. Mr. Reynolds, are you claiming your wife physically prevented you from reading the documents, or that she verbally misrepresented them? Alex shifted slightly, his confident facade wavering. She told me they were insurance papers, Your Honor. Given her illness, I had no reason to doubt her. Did you read them before signing? Judge Reeves pressed. A pause. I glanced at them. She had marked where I needed to sign. So you willingly signed legal documents without thorough review, Judge Reeves stated rather than asked. That's hardly a compelling argument for fraud, Mr. Winters. As the hearing progressed, the full extent of Alex's financial deception was laid bare through Tobias's methodical presentation. Bank statements, transfer records, timestamps that coincided with my hospitalization, all painting a damning picture of calculated betrayal. When it was Alex's turn to speak, he attempted to redirect, portraying himself as the victim of my manipulation and Tobias's vindictive interference. My wife has been unwell, Your Honor. She's clearly being influenced by her former boyfriend, who has had an agenda against our marriage from the beginning. I felt rather than saw Tobias tense beside me, but his voice remained measured as he objected. Mr. Reynolds is attempting to deflect from the documented evidence of his own misconduct by making unfounded accusations about counsel's motives. Judge Reeves nodded curtly. Sustained. Mr. Reynolds, restrict your comments to the financial matters at hand. The most revealing moment came when Tobias presented the recording of my conversation with Veronica, a conversation she had consented to have documented after realizing the extent of Alex's deception. Her clear, measured voice filled the courtroom, describing how Alex had manipulated funds from her investment firm, how he had planned their future using money stolen from both me and her clients. Alex's face drained of color as he listened, his eyes darting to his attorney in undisguised panic. This was the one contingency he hadn't planned for, that the women he had played against each other would ultimately compare notes and discover the truth together. After 3 hours of evidence, presentation, and increasingly desperate objections from Alex's attorney, Judge Reeves called a brief recess. As she left the courtroom, Alex made his move. He approached our table with the confident stride of a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered. Tobias shifted subtly, positioning himself between us, but I placed a hand on his arm. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment Alex realized he could no longer manipulate the narrative. We need to talk, Alex said, his voice low, meant for my ears only. This has gone far enough, Alicia. You've made your point. I regarded him calmly, noting the calculated concern in his expression, the slight furrow of his brow, the soft modulation of his voice, the practiced sincerity in his eyes. How many times had this exact performance convinced me to doubt my own perceptions? There's nothing to discuss, Alex. The evidence speaks for itself. His facade cracked slightly, irritation flashing across his features before he could suppress. This is ridiculous. You know I would never deliberately hide assets from you. There are explanations for all of this that you're— He glanced at Tobias with barely disguised contempt. Lawyer hasn't allowed me to present. Then present them to the judge, I replied evenly. Alex leaned closer, lowering his voice further. Don't do this to us. Think about what you're throwing away. Everything we've built, our reputation, our future. Is this revenge really worth it? The question hung between us, a perfect distillation of how fundamentally he had misunderstood the situation. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, truth, reclamation. But Alex, viewing everything through the lens of his own motivations, could only conceptualize my actions as vengeance, a reaction to him rather than an assertion of my own agency. This isn't revenge, Alex. It's self-preservation. His expression hardened, the mask of concerned husband dropping completely. You'll regret this. When the dust settles and you realize what you've lost, Mr. Reynolds. Tobias's voice cut through Alex's threat with quiet authority. This conversation is over. Return to your table. For a moment, I thought Alex might object, might finally reveal his true nature in this public setting. But years of maintaining his carefully constructed image prevailed. He straightened, adjusted his tie, and nodded curtly before returning to his attorney. When Judge Reeves returned, her expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. She reviewed her notes briefly before addressing the courtroom. Having examined the evidence presented by both parties, I'm prepared to rule on the emergency motions before me. She turned her penetrating gaze first to Alex, then to me. Mr. Reynolds, your motion to invalidate the divorce filing on grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation is denied. There is no compelling evidence that Mrs. Reynolds prevented you from reading the documents you signed. Alex's attorney began to object, but Judge Reeves continued, her tone brooking no interruption. Furthermore, the evidence of systematic financial misconduct is substantial and troubling. The court finds that Mr. Reynolds has indeed attempted to conceal marital assets during pending divorce proceedings, a serious violation of his fiduciary responsibility. She shuffled the papers before her, then delivered the decisive ruling. Therefore, I am granting Mrs. Reynolds's motion for emergency, injunctive relief. All assets currently frozen will remain so until final divorce proceedings. Mr. Reynolds is ordered to provide a complete accounting of all financial activities for the past 3 years, including all offshore accounts and business arrangements. Failure to comply fully will result in contempt charges. She paused, her gaze sharp as she addressed Alex directly. Mr. Reynolds, the court takes a particularly dim view of attempts to hide assets while a spouse is medically incapacitated. Consider yourself fortunate that Mrs. Reynolds has not yet pursued criminal charges for financial fraud. The finality in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a suggestion or a preliminary ruling. It was decisive judgment. Alex had lost, not just the motion, but the carefully constructed narrative that had allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. As the implications of the ruling settled over the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of Alex's expression, a momentary crack in his composure that revealed genuine shock. He had truly believed, until this very moment, that his charm and manipulations would prevail as they always had before. But the rules had changed. Or perhaps more accurately, I had changed, transformed from the accommodating, doubt-filled woman he had systematically created into someone capable of standing firmly in her own truth. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I stood in the doorway of my new apartment, cardboard boxes stacked neatly around me, sunlight streaming through uncovered windows. The space was smaller than the house I had shared with Alex, a 2-bedroom unit in a renovated textile mill in the Arts District, but it felt infinitely more spacious without the weight of pretense and performance. After Judge Reeves's ruling, Events had unfolded with surprising speed. Alex, faced with the prospect of a full financial investigation that would likely uncover even more damning evidence, had suddenly become amenable to settlement negotiations. Tobias had leveraged this unexpected cooperation ruthlessly, securing terms that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. "He's cutting his losses," Tobias had explained during our strategy session. "The longer this drags on, the more damage to his professional reputation. He needs this to end quickly and quietly." The settlement had been finalized yesterday, a clean division that left me with resources to rebuild my life entirely on my terms. The house would be sold, the proceeds split. My name was now on separate accounts that Alex couldn't access. The offshore funds had been traced and reclaimed. My financial future was secure. But more valuable than the monetary settlement was the recovery of my sense of self. As I began unpacking books into the built-in shelves of my new living room, art monographs and exhibition catalogs I had kept hidden in the basement of our marital home, I felt a profound contentment that had nothing to do with material security. Donna arrived around noon, carrying a small houseplant and a bottle of champagne. "Housewarming essentials," she announced, setting them on the kitchen counter. I smiled, accepting both gifts with genuine pleasure. "It's barely noon." "It's exactly noon," she corrected, checking her watch. "And if ever a moment called for celebration, it's this one." As she popped the cork and filled 2 juice glasses, proper stemware still buried somewhere in the moving boxes, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The pneumonia that had seemed like such misfortune had become the catalyst for my liberation. Alex's careless signing of divorce papers had set in motion a chain of events that exposed the true nature of our marriage. Tobias's steadfast legal strategy had transformed a potential crisis into an opportunity for justice. "To new beginnings," Donna said, raising her glass. "And old friendships," I added, clinking my glass against hers. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you for standing by me through all of this." Donna shook her head, dismissing my gratitude. "You would have done the same for me. Besides, watching you reclaim your life has been the highlight of my year." After our impromptu celebration, we continued unpacking, transforming the blank canvas of the new apartment into a space that reflected my tastes, my priorities, my aesthetic. No more sterile minimalism designed to impress Alex's colleagues. No more muted color palette chosen to create the right backdrop for his professional image. Instead, vibrant artwork covered the walls, comfortable furniture invited relaxation rather than formal entertaining, and books, so many books, filled every available shelf. By evening, exhausted but satisfied, I sat alone in my partially organized living room, watching the sunset paint the exposed brick walls with warm golden light. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Got my flight booked for next weekend. Can't wait to see your new place. And the new you." I smiled, typing back, "Same person, just no longer hiding." My phone buzzed again almost immediately, but this time with an email notification. The sender's name caused my breath to catch momentarily. Alexander Reynolds. For a second, old instincts kicked in. Anxiety, apprehension, the automatic preparation to manage his mood and expectations. But the feeling passed as quickly as it had arrived. Whatever the email contained, manipulation, apology, threat, it held no power over me anymore. I could read it now, or tomorrow, or never. The choice was entirely mine. And that simple fact, the freedom to choose my own response without fear of consequences, was perhaps the most profound change in my new normal. A month after settling into my new apartment, I received an unexpected call from Claudette. After her testimony at the hearing, we had rekindled our professional connection, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss developments in the art world I had been absent from for too long. "Have you seen the business journal yet?" she asked, without preamble. "No, why?" I balanced my phone between ear and shoulder as I watered the steadily growing collection of plants that now brightened my living space. There's a feature on financial misconduct in investment firms. Your ex-husband is mentioned, not by name, but the details make it clear who they're talking about. Apparently, there's an ongoing investigation into his firm's practices. I set down the watering can, surprised by my own lack of reaction. A few months ago, news of Alex facing professional consequences would have filled me with anxiety. Not for him, but for how his mood would affect our home life, how I would need to manage the fallout of his stress and anger. Now, it was simply information, relevant but not destabilizing. That's not surprising, I said. Based on what came out during the divorce, there were clearly larger issues at play. That's not all, Claudette continued, her voice lifting with barely suppressed excitement. The Haverford Gallery is looking for a new curator for their Contemporary Women Artists program. The director specifically asked if I thought you might be interested in returning to the field. This news hit differently, a sudden spark of possibility I hadn't allowed myself to consider yet. My career, once vibrant and promising, had been gradually sidelined during my marriage. Not through any explicit demand from Alex, but through 1,000 small discouragements, scheduling conflicts that always prioritized his work, subtle undermining of my accomplishments until continuing felt like swimming against an overwhelming current. I don't know, I admitted. It's been years. But you've kept up with developments, Claudette pressed. I've seen your bookshelves. And talent doesn't disappear, Alicia. It just waits for the right conditions to flourish again. After we hung up, I sat at my small dining table, considering the unexpected validation from multiple directions. The art world hadn't forgotten me. My professional identity hadn't been erased by years of playing the supportive wife. And Alex, the man who had seemed so powerful, so in control of our shared reality, was facing the natural consequences of his actions without my involvement. Later that afternoon, as I was browsing exhibition catalogs online, considering whether to accept the gallery's invitation to interview, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Paul, Tobias's brother who had provided security during the most uncertain days of my divorce, standing there with an unexpected formality. Ms. Warner, he corrected himself, using my reclaimed maiden name. I'm not intruding. Not at all, I said, genuinely pleased to see him. Is everything all right? He nodded. Everything's fine. I'm actually here unofficially. I've started my own security consulting firm, and I'm reaching out to people who might need our services. I invited him in, offering coffee which he accepted, with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized his presence at my home during the divorce proceedings. I don't imagine I need security services anymore, I said as I handed him the coffee. Probably not, he agreed, but network security, privacy consulting, those might be relevant, especially if you're returning to professional life. I raised an eyebrow. News travels fast. Tobias mentioned it, Paul admitted. He keeps tabs on you. Not intrusively, he added quickly. He just cares. The simple acknowledgement of Tobias's continued concern was yet another form of validation, not of my professional capability or of the justice of my divorce, but of my worth as a person deserving of care and consideration. As Paul outlined his new venture, I found myself genuinely interested, asking questions about digital security and professional privacy that would have seemed irrelevant during my marriage, but now felt like important considerations for my newly independent life. When he left, promising to email more information, I realized how dramatically different these interactions were from my life just months ago. No calculations about how to report the conversations to Alex, no anxiety about whether my interests or connections would meet his approval. No need to justify my time or attention. External validation was no longer something I craved to compensate for Alex's withholding of approval. Instead, it simply confirmed what I already knew. I was reclaiming my place in the world, on my own terms. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the Haverford Gallery, overseeing the final placement of pieces for my inaugural exhibition as their new curator. The show, titled Reclamation Women Artists Redefining Space, featured works that explored themes of identity, transformation, and self-determination, topics that resonated deeply with my own recent journey. My return to the art world had been surprisingly seamless. Rather than finding myself irrelevant after years away, I discovered that my perspective had been enriched by my experiences. I understood the power dynamics depicted in certain works with a visceral knowledge that went beyond academic appreciation. I recognized the subtle visual language of constraint and liberation in a way I couldn't have before. As I adjusted the lighting on a particularly powerful installation piece, my phone vibrated in my pocket. The email notification showed Alex's name, the third message he had sent since our divorce was finalized. I hadn't opened the previous ones, not out of fear or avoidance, but because they simply hadn't seemed important enough to interrupt whatever I was doing at the time. Today, however, with the exhibition complete and a sense of closure permeating my professional and personal renaissance, I decided to read what he had to say. The message was brief. Alicia, I'm leaving Boston. The investment firm has undergone restructuring, and my position has been eliminated. I've accepted an offer in Seattle. Before I go, I wanted to acknowledge that the end of our marriage was primarily my responsibility. My therapist suggests this kind of communication is important for my recovery process. I hear you're curating again. That's good. You were always at your best in that role. Alex, I read the message twice, noting the careful wording. Not quite an apology, not fully an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but the closest Alex could likely come to admitting fault. The reference to therapy was unexpected, a sign that perhaps he was confronting aspects of himself that had remained unexamined during our marriage. The most revealing part, though, was his comment about my curatorial work. Even in what was ostensibly a message of reconciliation, he couldn't resist defining when I was at my best, still attempting, however subtly, to assert his authority to evaluate and judge my choices. I closed the email without replying, neither angry nor pleased, simply unaffected. Alex's opinion, once the guiding force of my existence, was now just one perspective among many, and not a particularly important one at that. Everything all right? Tobias's voice drew my attention back to the present moment. He stood in the gallery doorway, looking slightly out of place in his tailored suit among the contemporary art installations, but his warm smile belonged perfectly in my new life. Our relationship had evolved in unexpected ways since the divorce. The professional connection had gradually softened into friendship, and recently, into something with the potential to become more. We were proceeding cautiously, both aware of the complicated history and the importance of my newly established independence. Just the past making a brief appearance, I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Nothing that needs addressing. He nodded, understanding without requiring details. That was one of the qualities I most appreciated about the man he had become in the years since our youthful relationship. His respect for boundaries, his patience with processes that couldn't be rushed. The exhibition looks remarkable, he said, gesturing to the transformed gallery space. You've created something meaningful here. Thank you. I took a final glance around the room, satisfaction settling deep in my bones. It feels right, like everything is exactly where it should be. We moved through the gallery together, Tobias asking thoughtful questions about specific pieces, genuinely interested in understanding the artistic vision I had curated. His engagement was neither performative nor calculated, simply the natural curiosity of someone who valued my perspective. As we reached the central installation, a powerful mixed-media piece depicting a woman emerging from a translucent cocoon, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The illness that had seemed like such a setback had actually been the catalyst for my transformation. Alex's careless signing of those divorce papers had been the first, unraveling thread in the tightly woven fabric of control he had established. "Ready for tomorrow's opening?" Tobias asked as we completed our circuit of the gallery. I nodded, feeling a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with internal certainty. More than ready. It's time to share this with the world. As we left the gallery together, I didn't look back at the exhibition space or check my phone for further messages from the past. The path ahead, professionally, personally, spiritually, was entirely my own to define. Not in reaction to Alex's constraints or as a rebellion against what had been, but as a positive assertion of who I had always been beneath the layers of accommodation and compromise. The woman who had lain sick in bed, manipulated into signing unread documents, was gone. In her place stood someone who had not only survived, but had transformed the experience into a foundation for authentic living, strong enough to build upon, solid enough to trust, and entirely, unquestionably her own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.